contact with the realtor, and we were able to look at the property yesterday, and it looks like it needs a fair amount of cleaning up, a little bit of rearrangement and some work on it. It seems like it would be a reasonable option. So Lee had asked that we come here this Wednesday at 6 p.m. If you guys could be here in person, and we'll discuss what we are going to be able to do. I'm very thankful that we have a roof over our head. I think some walls around us on a day like today would also be a nice blessing to have as well. So if you guys can be here in person, 6 p.m. on Wednesday, we'll try to do that. We're going to be looking here at 2 Kings chapter 18, and we are going to go through a number of scriptures. I realized that I had great plans in my head of what I was going to do. I was going to print off all the scriptures and hand them out so that you guys didn't have to flip through all the pages, and then other stuff happened, and here we are. So I'm going to ask you guys to flip with me, but I'm going to try to put them in order so that it's going to be an easy task. We're going to try to split hairs today a little bit. I want to talk about the topic of trust. And sometimes that seems to be combined in the same breath or the same word as faith. Especially as you get in the New Testament, the way that Jesus talks about faith in him seems to be linked directly with trusting in him. The Old Testament seems to kind of split those two topics apart a little bit, and I want to follow some of that thread through the Old Testament. We're going to look here in 2 Kings 18, and if you notice the heading over chapter 18, you're dealing with the time period of Hezekiah. So you have the divided kingdom period. This is dealing with Judah, and Hezekiah being one of the best kings that Israel had, or Judah had, during this time period. And if you kind of look at some of the task that was given, or that he did, here in verse 1, in the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Eliah, king of Israel, Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. Now, he was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that David his father had done. He removed the high places and broke the pillars and cut down the Asherah, and he broke into pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the people of Israel had made offerings to it, and it was called Nehushtan. Now notice verse 5, he trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that there was none like him among the kings of Judah after him, nor were those who were before him. And he held fast to the Lord, and he did not depart from following him, but kept his commandments that the Lord commanded Moses. We think of David as being someone of great faith and great courage. We think of Daniel maybe as a man of prayer, Joseph as a man of integrity. Sometimes we kind of lump all of their characteristics in kind of one main thing. And in that same vein, in 2 Kings 18, the writer of the Chronicles lumps all of his deeds into the phrasing that he trusted the Lord, and that made him better than all of the kings of Judah before him and all the kings of Judah after him. Trust is a big thing. And I want to distinguish it from faith just for a moment to say that faith is, we believe that God exists. We believe that he rules in the kingdoms of men. We believe that he hears our prayers. We believe that Jesus came and died for our sins. I think that those things seem to be fairly well established. I don't want to insult us by saying that we don't have faith in those things. But trust seems to go further than that. I believe that my parents exist. I believe that my dad cares for me. If he tells me to jump off of a building into his arms, I don't know if I would trust him in that. Trust goes the extra step beyond just believing that God exists and believing that he has done things in our lives. And I don't know how much we can really talk about that without getting into the book of Psalms and looking at the wording that the psalmist put into place. And so what I would like to do is I would like to go through the Psalms, not extensively, but at least chronologically, and look at a number of them and look at the phrasing that's given. I want to begin in Psalm 4, and we'll just pick out a couple of the Psalms. I would suggest, just as a habit, as a practice, to spend time in the Psalms. There's history that we have in the Bible. We have items of wisdom, items of poetry, and the Psalms do something that no other book does in the way of getting the Word of God to kind of dwell in your mind the same way. And I would suggest you take time to do so. Someone had suggested every morning with your cup of coffee to sit down and read a couple Psalms out loud, and I think that is a great way to do it. But the more that you read through the Psalms, the more that this wording becomes a part of your mindset. And I want to read here in Psalm 4, there in verse 5, where David writes, "Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord." A couple pages over in Psalm 9. Psalm 9 and in verse 10. David again writes, "And those who know your name put their trust in you. For you, O Lord, have not forsaken those who seek you." He makes the point that those who know your name, who understand you or know you personally, put their trust in you. A couple pages over into chapter 20. I know we're going through quite a bit of these quite quickly, but part of that's because it's 54 degrees outside. So, chapter 20 in verse 7. Again, David writes, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." Psalm 22, we'll look at verse 4, 5, 8, and 9. This is the psalm that Jesus quotes while on the cross. "Oh my God, I cried to you." Starting in verse 4. "In you our fathers trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame." And verse 8 and verse 9. "He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. Yet you are he who took me from the womb, and you made me trust at my mother's breast." Now here you kind of have two major things that happen. Jesus quotes verse 1 on the cross, and then Matthew records for us that those who crucified him quote verse 8. "He trusts in the Lord, let him deliver him." But the psalmist here is pronouncing that God is trustworthy, that his forefathers trusted in God, and God made him trust from his very young age. And in Psalm 28 and verse 7, Psalm 28 and verse 7, "The Lord is my strength and my shield. In him my heart trusts, and I am helped. My heart exalts, and with my song I give thanks to him." Psalm 37 and in verse 5. Psalm 37 and in verse 5. Psalmist David here writes, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday. Be still before the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourself over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil desires." Where he says there in verse 5, "Commit your way to the Lord and trust in him, and he will act." Starting off where we started back in 2 Kings chapter 18 is the information on Hezekiah. It begins by telling us that Hezekiah trusted God in a way that others before him hadn't trusted, and those who after him didn't trust him. And you get one chapter over into 2 Kings chapter 19, and end of chapter 18, beginning of chapter 19, you have Sennacherib, who comes and he sends a messenger to Hezekiah. And he tells him all the kingdoms around you have fallen to the hand of the king of Assyria. And you're next. All of their gods failed, and your defenses are broken down, your army is decimated. He issues a challenge that he will even give you horses if you could put enough men on them. I mean, what a taunt. It'd be like saying, we're going to send you tanks if you can just put enough tankers in them to run them, and then we'll fight against you. It was a devastating challenge. And it's one that he had a lot of authority behind. It wasn't just, oh, I happen to be me and my 10 guys are going to come and raid your nation. It's me and my entire massive army who outnumber your entire nation who have decimated all the nations around you are going to come and decimate you as well. Isaiah records what happens. Isaiah is the prophet who was sent to go and talk to Hezekiah during that time. And he tells him to put his trust in God and let God act on their behalf. And he does. Hezekiah wins a battle that he never even had to fight, conquering more people than most of the kings before him had conquered in all of the battles that they had fought. And so when David writes here in Psalm 37 to commit your way to the Lord, trust in him and he will act, Hezekiah is a great example of that. If you're still in Psalms, go over to Psalm 56 and in verse 3. Psalm 56, there in verse 3. This is the Psalm of David again. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid, for what can flesh or what can man do to me? David makes, we never think of David as being that afraid. A guy who's surrounded by mighty men of valor, a person who ripped apart a lion and killed the giant. What else is there to be afraid of? Like, after you've done those things, I think breakfast becomes pointless after that. So he makes the point that whenever he's afraid, I put my trust in you. In God I trust, I shall not be afraid, for what can man do to me? And sometimes those are not the words that I have circling around in my head. I have words of, I believe God exists, and I believe that Jesus is his son, but whether or not things are going to work out right in my life, whenever I'm afraid of things not going the way that I think they should, I begin to trust more in myself, or fret a lot in what I can and cannot do. Same chapter in verse 11. In God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? David repeats the same phrase throughout this verse. And we could spend the rest of this afternoon freezing and reading through Psalms and all the verses that talk about trust. But I want to go over really quickly and look at just 3 passages over in Proverbs written by David's son Solomon. Starting in chapter 3, Proverbs chapter 3. We've been through most of these in the last couple of weeks in our Wednesday night class. But chapter 3 and verse 5, Solomon writes to his son, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. That is so difficult. We trust in us. I've done this. I can do this. I will do this again. I have made myself prosper in this area, or I have succeeded in this area, or by my hard work, or by my industriousness, I have produced this and that. And whenever things go sideways, well, I need to knuckle under, and I need to dig harder, and I need to try more, and I need to succeed. And yet, what Solomon says is, trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. Chapter 16, and in verse 20. One of my favorite verses here in Proverbs. There in verse 20, whoever gives thought to the word will discover good, and blessed is he who trusts in the Lord. And then one more verse, the one that we had just gone over on Wednesday night, a couple Wednesday nights ago, I should say, in chapter 22, verses 17 and verse 18. This is the introduction to the 30 words of saying that Solomon gives. And he says, incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply your heart to know my knowledge. For it will be pleasant to you if you keep them within you, if all of them are ready on your lips, that your trust may be in the Lord. I have made them known to you today, even to you. That the words, incline your ear, apply your heart, have them be on your lips, that your trust may be in the Lord. I don't want to overstate this case. The reason I don't like shotgunning verses, I don't like going verse after verse after verse and not picking up the context. But I want this phrasing to kind of sink into our minds. I want it to be something that is on our lips all the time. That whenever I'm afraid, I'll put my trust in God. That I'm going to give thought to His Word, and I'm going to put my trust in God. That I'm going to commit my way to the Lord and trust in God. I want that to be something that we think about on a very regular basis, that whatever happens, I trust that God is going to do what's best. And I want to think about some other things. I have a whole bunch of passages. I have a whole list here. I was hoping to be warmer, and I was hoping to have a handout. But neither one of those things happened, so I'm just going to talk about them very briefly. There are other things that the Bible talks about that people put their trust in. Isaiah chapter 31, God tells Hezekiah, through Isaiah, not to trust in chariots or in horsemen. So here is this massive army that comes up against him. And God tells Isaiah, don't worry about them, A, and B, don't put your trust in your horses or your chariot. And then God saves them anyways. Isaiah 42 and verse 11. God reprimands the Israelites for putting their trust in metal images, in idols, who are mute and cannot save and cannot do anything. I find it interesting how many people who claim to be Christians still have little metal images, either in their car or in their church buildings, that they put a lot of trust in. There are granite ones and marble ones. I think John had mentioned this before. There are some overseas where the big toes are missing, where people have kissed them until the stone has worn away. In Jeremiah chapter 7 and verse 8, Jeremiah tells the people not to trust in deceptive words. That people are going to come along and tell you false things about God. And he says, don't trust in deceptive words. In chapter 48 of Jeremiah, in verse 7, Jeremiah warns the people that they have trusted in their own work and they have trusted in their own treasure. That they thought that by their efforts they had made themselves rich, and by their treasure that they have, they can continue to prosper in the future. Ezekiel in chapter 16, where he gives the image of Israel being born and being taken under God's wing and then being married later on, and then beginning to play the harlot. He says in chapter 16 to verse 15 that you trusted in your own beauty that God bestowed on them. That you thought that you were such a great and wonderful nation that you could just continue to prosper by yourself. We looked at Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 5 where he says, trust not in your own understanding. And over in Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 28 where he says, trust not in riches. Which obviously goes hand in hand with what Paul writes to Timothy over in 1 Timothy chapter 6. Do not put your trust on the uncertainty of riches, but on God who richly provides. Or Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 22, where he warns them not to trust in their strongholds. Where David writes in the book of Psalms that it's in vain that the watchman sits to keep watch if the Lord does not keep watch. In vain does one build a house unless the Lord establishes its foundations. And so Solomon tells us to trust not in our strongholds. Or again in Proverbs 28 and verse 26, to trust not in your own mind. There's a lot of things that we tend to put our trust into. We trust in the fact that we have a job, and so next week we'll have more money coming in and we'll have more food on the table. We trust in the fact that we have a bank account or a 401k or CDs or whatever all the extra stuff is, stocks, I don't know. I don't have a diversified portfolio or just a portfolio. I just have one of those paper ones. That's all I got. But we put a lot of trust in those that in the future things are going to work out. We put a trust in what happens in November 2nd or 3rd, whatever that day is, that this election's going to go well and that the government's going to continue to do all that it can to protect us or help provide for us or whatever else we trust in the government to do for us. That becomes a part of our main trust. I want to look at just 3 really quick examples. We looked at Hezekiah already, but I want to look at 2 more. Daniel chapter 3. And I want us to look at the phrasing that's used there. So Daniel chapter 3 is Nebuchadnezzar makes his golden image, and he commands that on a certain day at a certain time when you hear all these musical instruments played, wherever you are, you stop what you do, You turn to the image and you bow down and you worship. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do not do that. And so the king brings them into his courts, and he says, well, maybe your knees were stiff, or maybe your ears were dull, maybe you just had other things going on in your life. How about I give you another chance? We'll play all the music again, and now in my presence, all you have to do is turn around, look at the golden image, and worship. That's all you got to do. Bow down and worship. And they don't. And so he becomes furious. And he asks the question here in chapter 3 and in verse 15, who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? And I want us to note both their faith and their trust that is demonstrated here in the next couple of verses. In verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered, saying to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God who we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. That's faith. God is able to. We have no need to answer. We completely believe that God is able to do so. And then the next statement is trust. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king, but if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve the gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. There is the faith, yes, God can do this. And then the statement of trust that even if he doesn't, we're still not going to do it. That God's still going to do what's best, even if it's death for me. That's a really, really challenging principle. To have both of those things play out in our lives. The next one is in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. And I want us to see the kind of that splitting of hairs distinction between faith and trust. Paul is writing here of what happened to him in Asia. And I believe what he's talking about is what happened to him and Barnabas. When they went from Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, and being stoned and being having to escape through a window and being let out of a basket down a city wall. He makes the point here in verses 8 down through verse 11 of 2 Corinthians chapter 1 that it taught him something. Now, he's seen Jesus on the road to Damascus. I think Paul understands that God's real. I think he understands pretty clearly that Jesus is his son. I think he believes very much in the Word of God and the plan for the church. I think all of that is well established in Paul's mind. But he makes note here that what he suffered taught him something. In verse 8, he says, we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction that we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death. But this was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He delivered us from such deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again. You must also help us by prayer, that many will give thanks on behalf of the blessings granted us through prayers of many. I think that there was possibly a little trust that Paul needed to learn, to set his hope fully on God, or that he relied on God and not simply on himself or his own abilities. And I don't want to insult any of us to say that we don't have faith, but I want to ask this today, where is your trust? What is it that you really rest your trust on? Spend some time in the Psalms. Get that wording kind of sinking into your mind that whenever you're afraid, put your trust in God. Whenever challenges arise, to put your trust in God. To let the words from Proverbs to sink in, to not put my trust in my own understanding, but in the Lord. To not trust in my own mind, but in God. To not put my trust in chariots or metal images, not trust in horses or riches or my stronghold or anything else, but to trust fully and wholly and completely on God. Life is uncertain. I feel like that's a bit of an understatement after everything that's happened this last year. Or what's going to happen. We're going to have a change of government soon, possibly. We're going to have some change of some government to some degree in some way. I have no idea to what degree or who or exactly what. But the question is, are we going to fret and have our hearts faint over whoever is elected or whatever policies are put into place? As you face the uncertainties of work or financial difficulties, are those things that are going to wreck your life, or are you going to trust that God will truly provide? I mentioned that the New Testament seems to blend those ideas. As you have Jesus and the apostles in the boat, and the waves are coming over, and they say, Lord, don't you care that we're perishing? And he belittles them, or he ridicules them, or mocks, not mocking, he puts them in their place, we'll put it that way, by calling them people of little faith. And he blends those two ideas of both believing that he can and trusting that he will. I want to believe that, I think that all of us believe that God can. And I hope that we take some time this week to ask, do we trust that he will? And that's really the question that I have for us. John has picked up the Song of Invitation. If we can help you establish your trust, to act more on your faith, then let us know as we sing the song that John's picked out.